Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture Albion Never Dies. Today I am joined by my friend Caine, who you may remember from the deep dive into tea, a deep dive into British men's wardrobe, and today it's a deep dive into Gibraltar Part 2. The first part was last week, as we really looked into what is Gibraltar, why is Gibraltar British, this little place in the Mediterranean. But this week it's really about the fun side. What can you do if you go to Gibraltar? And of course you can listen to these episodes in either order. You can listen to this one first and the last one second, or whatever you like. But these are basically the top things to do if you go to Gibraltar, as told by my friend Caine, who is a phenomenal powerhouse of knowledge. I really love having him on. You can check out his videos, youtube.com/videos by Caine, where he talks a great deal about Chinese folk religion, and he's as interesting there as he is here. Do check them out. But first, let's have a look at what you can do in Gibraltar.
Anyway, let's move on to something a little bit less heavy. Gibraltar is a really great place to go on holiday, actually. I'm kind of surprised that more Britons don't go on holiday there, because firstly, it's really convenient. There are direct flights from London and Manchester. They're very affordable, particularly if you go kind of in the down season or off season. And it's just a really nice, easy place to travel. You know, the official language is English. And as far as I could tell, everyone there was completely bilingual, or at least I suppose all the local people were completely bilingual. So you never had any problems. And there's the old stereotypes about British people abroad, right? We just talk really loudly and really slowly. Well, you don't need to do that. You can talk at normal speed and everybody will be able to understand you. Now, I want to talk about things to do if you go on holiday in Gibraltar, like I did quite recently. However, I don't just want to give you the sort of list of top 10 things to do, because, you know, your listeners can go and Google that themselves. They're not going to benefit a lot from hearing me talk about it, right? What I would say, though, actually, is that if you do Google best things to do in Gibraltar, the lists that you'll find are pretty accurate of the best things to do. And I find that quite interesting because in my experience, I've traveled quite a lot. When you Google best things to do in whatever city or whatever country, I always find that in the list, at least a few of them are just tourist traps, or, you know, things that really are not worth doing. Like, they're not worth the money, or they're not worth the effort. You know, you'd have to take a bus to get there and a bus to get back or whatever. But what was cool about the ones in Gibraltar is actually, I would say that if you look at any of those lists, I don't think you're going to be disappointed if you go and do those things. So yeah, if you are going to go to Gibraltar, you know, do Google, and don't worry, you can probably just follow those lists. If you're there for a couple of days, you'll be absolutely fine. That's one thing I would say is I spent 5 days in total in Gibraltar, but 2 of those days were traveling days, so 3 full days. And I think as a tourist, that's probably about the maximum you're going to want to be there. It's an incredibly small place, right? As I mentioned before, it's only 3 miles from one end to the other. It's only about 1.5 miles, I think, in its fattest point. Most of that is taken up by an uninhabited giant rock, right? So everything is squeezed into this really small town area, which you can walk around very easily in, you know, almost no time at all. And so I think if you were going to spend, you know, if you wanted a 2-week holiday, maybe Gibraltar is not the place for you. Now, if there are some Gibraltarians listening to this, I can imagine they're saying, no, we've got amazing things to do. And I don't doubt it, right? I'm sure that there are things that could keep you busy for months. But the reality is, as a tourist, you often don't really have access to those things, right? You know, no matter how much of a sort of authentic experience you want and how hard you try, the reality is it's different being a tourist. There's only so many things you have access to. So if you are going to go 2-3 days, full days, it is probably plenty. And the first thing I'd absolutely recommend is just walking around the place. It's a perfect place to walk around. You know, obviously, as I mentioned a few times, it's small, but also the weather, as I've said before, is beautiful. I don't think, at least, you're going to get uncomfortably hot by walking around, as long as you remember to try and stay in the shade and, you know, sit down and have a coffee somewhere or something. It's an absolutely great place to walk. And I mean, to be honest, I would recommend that going on holiday anywhere. I think that walking is a really good way to see places. Walking allows for serendipity to happen in the way that taking a taxi or a bus to somewhere doesn't, right? If you've got to take the bus to the location, then there's no chance that you're going to happen upon some cute little cafe or some interesting old building. So yeah, I would kind of say that to wherever you're going to travel, but I think Gibraltar really, really, really is set up to walk. You absolutely don't need to rent a car or a motorbike. You could, if you want, take a bus. There are buses that go across the island 24 hours. I did take a bus a couple of times, but it was only because I've been walking for about 8 hours. It's kind of far away from where I was staying. I mean, to give you an example of one of the great things that I encountered when I was on a walk was a church called the Sacred Heart Church, which is a Catholic church at, I say at the bottom, not in the bottom, kind of a little bit up the rock. And it was the nicest church that I saw in the whole place, but it's not on any of the tourist lists or anything like that. It's this really nice Gothic building, and then when you walk inside, it's a Catholic church. Obviously, it has a lot of statues and a lot of artwork, which is, always really nice. If you're used to coming from the UK, where most of our churches are either Anglican or various low church Protestant churches, they're often, well, although maybe if you come from the US and you're used to sort of evangelical churches, our churches probably do seem very ornate, but compared to Catholic churches on the continent, they're not. So it was, in that sense, it was already like very beautiful. What was really cool about it was the entire ceiling was painted a really dark blue, and then there were lots of like white dots. So it was like you were looking up at the stars. I mean, obviously it wasn't the stars, you could tell it wasn't that realistic, but it was just really, really nice. And they had a big, crucifix there underneath it. And it was something I'd never seen in a church before. Like I'd never seen a church decorated in that way. And it wasn't a modern church either. As I said, it was a really beautiful old, I don't know if it was actually Gothic era, but it was Gothic style and certainly looked very old.
And for the listeners who aren't familiar, you have a series of videos by Caine on YouTube, where you look at, say, Chinese folk religion. So often examining temples and different religious beliefs is actually very much your game.
Yeah, definitely. This is something I'm quite interested in. I have a sort of amateur interest, I would say, in religion and theology, and it also crosses over with my interest in history and stuff like that. And yeah, I have in China, I spent a lot of time learning a lot about Chinese folk religion. I recently actually as well created one video about the history of Christianity in China. So if that is the kind of thing you're interested in, theology, the history of religion, do go ahead and check out my channel videos by Caine. Just type that into YouTube and you'll find it. Caine is Caine, by the way. And yeah, so this is the kind of thing that I like to. I do like to walk around and see old churches and stuff like that. Obviously, we're lucky in the UK that we have a lot of them, but as I said, we don't have so many Catholic churches, and it, at least to somebody who's kind of familiar with what churches of different denominations look like, it is quite striking the difference often between a Catholic church and an Anglican church or a Protestant church. And so yeah, this church really, really beautiful, really nice, nicest church I saw in all of Gibraltar, but it wasn't on any of these to-do lists or anything like that. And I just found out about it because I went for a walk, and absolutely, it's the perfect place to walk. So get your walking boots on. Walk around, enjoy yourself, particularly the older streets which go up the rock. Just a lot of little cute streets. If you're into taking photos, colorful houses, the kind that you see in Southern Europe and stuff. So that's really nice. And another thing I would say as well is about going up the rock. Now, again, you'll see, on many of these top 10 lists that the rock is going to be number 1 or something like that, and number 2 maybe. So the rock refers to the whole thing, right? The whole sort of hill. But on the top of it is a nature reserve, which is sometimes called the Upper Rock Nature Reserve, sometimes just called the Rock Nature Reserve. I think they've changed the name, so it depends on sort of where you're looking. Now, the Upper Rock Nature Reserve is worth going to. There's also a lot of tourist sites up there. So there's a thing called St. Michael's Cathedral, which is where you can go inside and see it's a very old cave with stalagmites and stalagmites. Which are the ones that come up? Which are the ones that go down? Do you ever remember? I don't remember from school.
Stalagmites push up with all their might. Stalactites hold on very tightly.
Okay. Yeah, so it has lots of those and it looks very nice. There's also, you can access the tunnels from up on the Rock Nature Reserve. Now, so yeah, it's worth going up the rock. You do have to pay. They've actually, the very top part of it, they've gated off all of the entrances. So you do have to pay to get on there. It's up to you whether you think it's worth the money or not. It's about £16 at the moment, but that £16 does get you into all of the tunnels and the caves and all that kind of other stuff. However, whether or not you decide to go up there and see all those sites, or if you decide it's not worth the money, what I would recommend is going up the rock at nighttime. If you go up at night and you take some of the trails, you can get most of the way up before you encounter any gates. And what you have is an absolutely beautiful view of the city. And the reason I say do it at nighttime is because firstly, it's cooler, but also Gibraltar is actually really lit up and looks really, really pretty at night. It's not something you'd kind of suspect when walking around in the daytime, because it seems like this old, Southern European kind of, it has a sort of almost parts out like a beach village kind of vibe. Do you understand what I mean? So you wouldn't expect it to be lit up in the way that, you know, you and I are familiar with Chinese cities being so lit up. Now, of course, it's not like that. It's not covered in neon, but it is really pretty to look at. So yeah, I would definitely say whether you choose to go up the rock in the day or not, take a trip up in the evening, go up some of the trails, because the trails go quite far. If you try to take the roads, then you encounter gates very quickly. But the trails go quite far. And yeah, do have a look at the view. I think it's worth seeing. Now, another thing which I haven't mentioned, and for your listeners who know, they might be surprised it's gotten this far and I haven't spoke about it. It is the monkeys, the
I was
apes,
wondering.
yeah, of Gibraltar. So Gibraltar has the only permanent wild population of monkeys in all of Europe. They're called Barbary apes. They came over from Africa, and they are now, I don't know how many are, I think there's a couple of hundred of them, and they all live up the rock. This is a huge draw for tourists. I think monkeys or apes, I always get confused. How do you decide which one's which? Because they're different, aren't they? Monkeys
they are different. I think these are monkeys, and that's purely through my education through Timothy Dalton and the Living Daylights.
Okay. Then why are they called Barbary apes?
I genuinely have no idea.
Okay. Because I'm not that ignorant of zoology. I did think they were monkeys, but then when I saw them referred to as Barbary apes, I was like, wait, hold on, are they apes or monkeys? But I did think.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say they were named back when people didn't know these things.
Anyway, they're basically they're very similar to macaques, right? They may even be macaques. I say I'm not ignorant of zoology. Here's me just dropping names of different kinds of monkeys as if they're all the same. Macaques, apes, whatever. Anyway, they're little monkeys, right? That's all you need to know about them. They're little monkeys. So yeah, they're a huge draw for tourists. They've become a symbol of Gibraltar. And if you walk up the rock, even if you don't go onto the nature reserve, you will see them. They come down quite low. And the reason why I haven't mentioned them is because, to be honest, they weren't a major draw for me. Now, I can absolutely understand why people would like to see monkeys in the wild, right? They obviously, there's the fact that they sort of seem like us, and that's really interesting. They're cute, especially the little ones, or if you have a mom with its baby, they're playful, you can get cool photos with them. I definitely get the attraction. However, having lived a decade in East Asia and traveling pretty extensively in Southeast Asia, I've seen them a lot in the wild, and my experiences with them have been a little bit well, basically, in the places where there's a lot of monkeys, macaques in particular, they're generally considered a nuisance, right?
Yeah.
If you go to Thailand, Malaysia, or say the new territories or Kowloon in Hong Kong, places like this, generally speaking, the locals are not fans of the monkeys. They think about them more in the way that we think of probably pigeons, but more dangerous than pigeons. And so my experience with monkeys, like I remember, for example, when I was in Thailand and I was trying to get hike up a very long set of steps to get to what was supposed to be a really nice temple, and I was basically bullied out of it by monkeys. I tried walking up the steps, and first one monkey came, and I tried to ignore him. Then another monkey, and then I had like 6 monkeys all growling at me, and of course I couldn't pass at that point. I've done a lot of running in the New Territories and in Kowloon in Hong Kong, where there are lots of monkeys. And the thing is, when you're running out on the trail, what will happen is you'll randomly come across like a pack of monkeys. There'll be like 20 or 30 of them, and you can't run through them. Do you know what I mean? Or they'll jump all over you. So you have to stop your run, and you have to walk and be really careful. And if you've got, you've probably got snacks with you if you're going on a long run, right? You've got to make sure your snacks are hidden. So it's not that I dislike them. I think that they're interesting animals. I don't mind looking at them. But at the same time, for me, I wasn't like, wow, I've got to go to Gibraltar to see monkeys.
Yeah.
Right?
I felt a similar thing when I was in Malaysia. I was going to a temple in Kuala Lumpur, outside Kuala Lumpur, and I was warned heavily about the monkeys, and they didn't bother me at all because I avoided them. Like, I don't want to go and have a selfie with them, right? And I think a lot of tourists do want that.
Yeah.
But I'm like, as you describe, exactly as you describe.
Yeah, exactly. And to be clear, I've never been attacked by monkeys myself or anything. And I've got some really cool pictures of monkeys that I've taken in the past. I definitely see the attraction. They are cute animals. But at the same time, because of my sort of many encounters with them, it's not like if you said to me, oh, let's go to this place and we can see, I don't know, some other really cool wild animal that I'm interested in, right? Well, like if you said like, go ahead.
So when I was an undergraduate, I guided students around. Lots of people do this job as a native English person. I guided, say, Chinese students around places. And frequently, if they're from one of the big Chinese cities, if they saw a squirrel, that was it for the next 10 minutes. I was like,
yeah.
oh no.
Yeah, that's something actually a lot of British people don't realise is squirrels are not that common, or at least they're not so easy to find and see in other countries. So many people who are not from the UK, when they come to the UK and they see a squirrel, they go crazy about it, right? Because squirrels are cute, and they also can be playful, and they can jump around and stuff.
And I can remember as a child going to Germany and red squirrels. I mean, the Germans didn't care, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, well, actually, an example, I suppose, when I behaved like that, when I was in Canada, there were a couple of times when I saw a skunk. And I mean, skunks are cool animals, right? They're the size of cats. They actually look beautiful if you look at them, with their white line and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, a skunk. I'm trying to get close. And all my Canadian friends are like, why the hell do you want to get near a skunk? Like, they're disgusting, because obviously they're skunks. They smell, right? Yeah. So just having spent a lot of time around monkeys, not a big thing for me. But if that's what you're interested in, if you've never seen monkeys, certainly go ahead and see them. Honestly, though, do be careful. I mean, you'll read it all on the internet, but if you go and read the reviews of seeing the monkeys, 90% are actually like, the monkey robbed my bag, the monkey jumped in my bag. There aren't so many reviews saying they're cute. So just
I'm the one reading the reviews, commenting, good.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just take a picture from a distance, enjoy them from a distance, and then walk on and go about your business. Now, another thing that I think I'd recommend to people going to Gibraltar are the beaches. Gibraltar is not at all famous for its beaches. That won't come up usually on the top 10, right? And not many people would think about going to Gibraltar for a beach holiday. It's more like going on a city break, right? And I would agree, generally, it's more of a city place than a beach place. But I went to two beaches. I went to Catalan Bay and Sandy Bay. They're walking distance from each other, and they're on the east side of the peninsula, which is almost completely undeveloped because there's basically no space. The rock just goes to the coast. There's about enough room for a very small, thin sort of one-lane road, and that's it. But they were really, really, really nice. Clean, beautiful water, like crystal clear water. I'll send you some pictures. One of them, Catalan Bay as well, is surrounded by all these really pretty old, some of them are old, not all of them are old, but colorful houses, that go right into the beach. There's a really cute little Catholic cathedral. I think it's dedicated to Our Lady of Suffering or something like that. Sand is very clean. You can swim in the water. There was a really nice little restaurant selling seafood. Just really nice place. I spent, I think, probably 3 or 4 hours there, having some food, relaxing on the beach. Absolutely easily as good as many beaches that I've been to in other countries. And then Sandy Bay, which is down the road. Interesting, Sandy Bay is a man-made beach. They actually import the sand, I heard, from the Sahara Desert. I don't know if that's true, but that's apparently where they import it from. And then they've put, what do you call them, barriers in the sea? Dikes? No.
I'm blanking, but they've got barriers. Anyway,
yeah, you know what I mean. So that there's no real tide for a big area. Yeah. And so it's perfect for swimming. And so that was absolutely really, really nice beach. Yeah, I suppose that's what it's called. Yeah, seawall. They put a couple of seawalls either side so that it's very good to swim. The beach itself is really big. Weirdly, there's no shops or restaurants on the beach, which is strange because it seemed like it's a great place to do business. Also, it means if you're going to go there, pack water and stuff yourself. But absolutely go to the beach, especially if you're going to spend something like 3 days or maybe even 4 days. And so you're really going to exhaust most of the main tourist sites in town. Head off to the beaches, and I think that you'll really enjoy it. And my last sort of more concrete recommendation of an actual place to visit would be John Mackintosh Hall. This is not the same Mackintosh as the coat, different Mackintosh. John Mackintosh was a Gibraltarian philanthropist. He left a lot of money to develop educational things and stuff in Gibraltar. And there's a whole hall that's been built, and it contains a theatre, a little bit of an art gallery, and a library. But the main thing is inside it, there's a really nice little cafe, very affordable. I think it was like £1.50 or something for a coffee. They had sandwiches, and it was just a really, really nice environment because it's right in the town. So it's in the busiest part of the town, but it's one of those places that you wouldn't really know it was there unless you were looking for it. So you go inside, and there's a sort of little courtyard, and there's some people, there's actually offices, so people just working there. You can have a coffee, and it's just a really, really nice place to get out of the hustle and bustle. So if you are in Gibraltar, I would definitely recommend going and having a coffee and a sandwich in John Mackintosh Hall.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Yeah. And all of these places, as you say, these are places you can go on foot.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the very bottom of the island, again, this is something that'll appear if you just look for things to do, is Europa Point. And at Europa Point, there's an old lighthouse. There's also a mosque. The mosque was donated by, either a king or one of the princes of Saudi Arabia. I can't remember which, but yeah, it's a very nice mosque. And you can go down there. You can even walk to that if you want to. Now that is a bit of a trek. If you were going to walk down there, you might want to take the bus back or vice versa. But yeah, absolutely all the places that I've just mentioned you could walk to. Now I wanted to finish by going over some fun facts, and well, fun is subjective. I don't know if I'm going to do fun, but these are things that I learned about because I just encountered them when I was on my holiday, right? So these aren't things that I sort of went and Googled fun facts about Gibraltar. They're things that I discovered. So the first is the water in Gibraltar. I tell you, it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting, right? Now, most of the time when you go to Spain, for example, people recommend not drinking the tap water.
Yeah.
A lot of Spanish people do drink it, you know. It's kind of it's your personal choice, but generally speaking, people would say don't drink the tap water. Gibraltar, you can absolutely drink the tap water, and that's what I did. Not only did I drink the tap water, I used it to make coffee. And okay, to put this into context, I live in an extremely hard water area, right? So everything that gets water near it gets covered in limescale. Kettles full of limescale on your taps, everything full of limescale, right? So when I opened the kettle in my Airbnb, and it wasn't a new kettle, it was clearly quite used, it didn't have any limescale in it whatsoever. So straight away, I wanted to know why this was, because obviously I'm constantly dealing with limescale, right? So I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then drinking the water, I noticed that it tasted very, very fresh, very sort of pure. So I decided to Google it. And 100%, or well, over 90% of Gibraltar's drinking water is actually desalinated seawater.
Oh, wow.
I know, right? Interesting stuff. I told you it'd be interesting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, water in Gibraltar has always been a problem. It's an exceptionally dry place. And not only does it not get a lot of rain, for whatever reason, there's very few places where you can actually bore into the ground and hit groundwater. So historically, there was a lot of outbreaks of cholera and yellow fever, and a lot of people just being constantly thirsty in Gibraltar because they couldn't get enough water. The primary way to get water was actually collecting rainwater because there were so few places where you could drill into the ground and make a well. And that was extremely inefficient because it hardly ever rains. It was considered never really practical to try and pipe water from Spain because of, you know, the Spanish claims over the territory and so on. So I think the first time they started doing it was about like the late 1800s or something, but it became like a serious thing more in like the middle of the 1900s, I think, where they started to desalinate seawater. It's a very expensive process. It's about 3 times more expensive than any other method of getting drinking water, but it is the only reliable way that it can be done. And so today, I think it's about 90% of Gibraltar's tap water is desalinated seawater. That's why it tastes very pure. That's why it doesn't contain any limescale. Interestingly, wastewater, so the water used to flush the toilets, the water they used to clean the streets and put out fires, is just seawater. If you were to drink your toilet water, it would be salty. Not that I'd recommend you do it, but if you were to drink your toilet water, because obviously there's no point in spending all the money desalinating water you're going to flush your toilet with, right? But so there is an interesting fact about Gibraltar. Now, mass, or sort of what you call large-scale desalination, does happen in some other places. They do it in one city in Saudi Arabia. They do it in another city in the United Arab Emirates. But as far as I know, Gibraltar is the only place where it's the sole or almost sole source of drinking water for the entire territory.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
And to give non-British listeners again an insight into our lives, my kettle has no issues because I live in Yorkshire and the water is just that good.
Well, it's not necessarily that hard water is bad, right? Hard water is not bad for you. In fact, some people apparently prefer the taste of hard water, and there's nothing wrong with limescale. It's not going to hurt you, but it's just when you open your kettle and it's caked in limescale, you get bits of limescale.
And you have to descale it.
It's very annoying. It's also apparently bad for your hair, they say.
Oh, is it?
That's what they say. I mean, I don't know. I haven't really looked into it that much.
One person in my life was rarely keen to tell me that, and I'm like, okay, I accept it. I feel no need to investigate.
I'm not going to investigate. It's probably true. I don't know. The other thing as well, which you mentioned before, is the currency. So why this is interesting is because I can't quite figure it out. Now, I think if I spent some more time, I probably could figure it out, but I don't want to spend loads of time reading about this. So maybe if you have any listeners who work in finance, perhaps, if they could shine some light on this. Basically, Gibraltar has its own currency, right? The Gibraltar pound. Before I went to Gibraltar, I was under the impression that the Gibraltar pound was a separate currency pegged at a 1-to-1 conversion rate with the Great British Pound. However, when I arrived there and I found out that when I pay for stuff on my card, it just registers as a completely standard payment. There's no conversion, like there's no using your card abroad charge, nothing, which by the way makes it very convenient. You can just completely pay on your card. When you draw money out from your bank, it just shows on your statement as a normal withdrawal. It doesn't, there's no conversion, there's no overseas withdrawal fee or anything like that. So then I got to thinking, hold on, is this actually a different currency? Or is it just the Gibraltar government printing its own notes? Now, that might sound odd to people who aren't familiar with the UK. So allow me to explain a little bit, right, for your listeners who maybe haven't been to the UK or aren't so familiar. In most countries, only one institution can print banknotes or mint coins. So, for example, in China, the People's Bank of China is the only institution that can print banknotes or mint coins. So wherever you are in China, this massive, diverse, very populous country, the notes that you get, the coins that you get are absolutely identical, unless you happen to find one that's really, really old or something.
Just to put my hand up in case of letter writers, in mainland China, not Hong Kong, Macau. So
yes, so in mainland China, only the People's Bank of China can print notes. Yeah, in the other Chinese places that are not part of mainland China, there's a different situation. Yeah, in the US, as far as I know, only the Federal Reserve can print notes. Is that correct?
No specialist knowledge, but that's all I saw in the US was only the standard banknotes that you see in films.
So as far as I know, I mean, it might not be every country in the world, but pretty much all countries in the world, right? There's only one institution that can print notes or mint coins. The UK is a little bit different, as it often is. There is only one institution that can mint coins. That's the Royal Mint. So it doesn't matter where you are in the UK, only the Royal Mint can mint coins. However, a number of banks can print banknotes. So the Bank of England is the only bank that can print banknotes in England and Wales. And the vast majority of banknotes in the UK are printed by the Bank of England. However, there are, I think, 3 Scottish banks, is it, that can print banknotes as well? Bank of Scotland, Royal Bank of Scotland, and one beginning with C.
Ooh, I don't know which is the one beginning with C, sorry.
Yeah, I want to say Caledonia, but I don't think that's true. I don't think that's correct. Or Clydesdale, is it? Clydesdale Bank, something like that? Anyway,
hold my hands up in ignorance.
And then I think there's 2 in Northern Ireland as well.
Yeah.
Bank of Ulster, another one. So although it sounds odd to imagine that there could be British pounds printed by a different bank, actually in the UK, it's not that odd at all to imagine that there is another. So then I started to think to myself, maybe that's how it works. Maybe in Gibraltar, it's just that the Gibraltar government, the Bank of Gibraltar or something, has the right to print notes. However, I started to think something was fishy when I also realized that Gibraltar has its own coins, right? And like I said, in the UK, only the Royal Mint can print coins. So then I looked into it on the internet, and it's not that clear. Really, it's not. There are some people who will say that the Gibraltar currency is a separate currency and point to the fact that it does have a different currency code, right? Which to me is obviously the strongest sort of argument in favor of that. But then there are others who say it's not a separate currency and point to the fact that, a bit like the Scottish banks, the Gibraltar notes have to be backed by Bank of England notes or Gibraltar government something, I don't know, because I'm not into finance.
Okay, that's a
anyway. So I started to look into this, and I actually read. So I've got too much free time, I suppose. I'm still on holiday from work for a little bit, so I've got too much free time. So the act that created the Gibraltar notes currency was the Currency Act 1934, and I started to read it, and I read the first bit of it, and I read the first paragraph, and then I just thought to myself, what am I doing? I'm not going to sit here and read like 50 pages of some act of parliament from the 1930s, and I stopped. So I'm still a little bit confused.
I feel we are at the point of the podcast experience for this podcast, which is I'm learning about British culture and I'm trying to share it and occasionally learn from other people. And I thought it's all about the journey, and this is really hitting that spot.
So I would absolutely love if somebody could give me a categorical answer. Is the Gibraltarian currency a separate currency, or is it like how in Scotland you get Scottish notes, but it's nevertheless part of the same currency? I would love to know for sure. What I can tell you, though, is it's pretty cool. You go to Gibraltar and you can use your English bank card or Scottish or whatever, British bank card, wherever you want. And there's no charge, there's no conversion rate or anything like that. Also, Bank of England notes, along with Royal Mint coins, are accepted everywhere. Nobody is remotely concerned. And in fact, Although, of course, like most places in the world these days, card is much more common than cash. So I didn't pay with cash that much. When I did pay with cash, I actually found that getting Bank of England notes was more common than getting Gibraltar notes. But I did get a Gibraltar note, though, which was pretty cool. I got a lot of Gibraltar coins. They did seem to be very common.
Okay.
But I only got one Gibraltar note. So yeah, that's the fun fact about the currency. It may or may not have its own currency. What it definitely does have is unique notes and coins. We can say that for sure. And now another thing was, it was a Friday evening and I was walking through the main street in town, which, by the way, was absolutely dead. If you want to go for nightlife, I wouldn't recommend Gibraltar. I don't think it's really a party place. But you know, if that's not your thing anyway, don't worry about it. Yeah. And as I was walking through, I saw, but I kept seeing actually groups of Jewish people, and I knew they were Jewish because they had skull caps, and they were wearing other kinds of, you know, sort of more traditional clothes.
As Disraeli mentioned.
Yes, as Disraeli mentioned, you said there were Jewish people there with skull caps, right? But it wasn't just a couple. You know, you might see a few. It was enough that it seemed significant. You know, that clearly Jewish people must be a significant minority, because this is only a place for 30,000 people, right? Yeah. And so I decided to look into it. And yes, it is actually the case that Jewish people are a very significant minority of the population, and it stems back to the persecution of Jews in Spain. So because of the persecution of Jews in Spain, they, of course, needed to flee during the Spanish Inquisition. Now, the Spanish actually made it a term of the treaty with Britain that the British administration wouldn't let Jews or Muslims own property in Gibraltar. However, it seems that the British administration basically just ignored that from day one. And far from not letting them own property there, Gibraltar actually became kind of a refuge for Jews fleeing. So because of all these Jewish people fleeing from persecution in Spain, and Gibraltar being, you know, a sort of safe haven where they could go to, they established a community there, and that community survives and thrives to this day. You can actually visit a Jewish cemetery there, which is really interesting. The cemetery was used between 1746 and 1848, so it's no longer used. I guess the Jewish population just uses, you know, whatever the city cemeteries are. But yeah, for a time it was used. And to give you an idea of how integrated the Jewish community is there, Jonathan Sacks, who's the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, he said, quote, "In the dark times of expulsion and inquisition, Gibraltar lit the beacon of tolerance." And he said that Gibraltar is probably the community where Jews have been most integrated. Interestingly, Douglas Ryan, who is a representative of the Jewish community of Gibraltar, said that other than Jerusalem, Gibraltar is the best place for Jews to live.
Wow.
So yeah,
okay.
That's two pretty strong statements in support of Gibraltar as a good place to live if you're Jewish, right? And also in terms of how many Jewish people there are, so there are 4 active synagogues in Gibraltar, which again, you know, population of 30,000 people is a lot of synagogues, right? And Jewish people make up 2% of Gibraltar's population. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but you've got to remember that globally, there are not that many Jewish people, right?
Yes.
It actually means that as a percentage of its population, Gibraltar has the 3rd highest number of Jewish people in any territory in the world, more than in the US, less, of course, than Israel. Yeah, which I think is really, really interesting, right?
Yeah, that is really interesting. I genuinely had no idea about that. It's really interesting.
Yeah. And then finally, the last interesting thing that I learned when I was there was that buses in Gibraltar are completely free if you are a Gibraltar resident, a member of the military, the British military, or a qualifying cross-border worker. So somebody who lives on the Spanish side but works in Gibraltar. Yeah. I discovered this because I was taking the bus one time, and I obviously paid to get on the bus. Very, very affordable, by the way. It's like £2.50 for a return, which is, at least compared to where I am, very cheap. But I noticed people were flashing what appeared to be an ID card and then just walking onto the bus. And so I thought to myself, wait, hold on, is it free for them? And I Googled it, and yeah, Gibraltar became the first place in the world to have free buses for all of its residents. That was back in 2012. The second city to do it was the capital of Estonia, but I forget the name. Vilnius, is it something?
You're asking me all the questions I don't know.
So yeah, if you obviously as a tourist, it's not going to affect you. You're going to have to pay, but I think that's pretty cool. And the buses are very efficient. They cover the entire island. They're 24 hours a day, so I think that's really good.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
They have
that is
night
good.
buses.
It's
Yeah,
better than where I live.
I know, right? It's really amazing. So those are my fun facts. Now, another thing which didn't make it to my list of fun facts, but I thought about when you were talking about the people having Spanish names, and we discussed about how they're kind of Gibraltarian, and that's a unique identity in and of itself, right? Is about the language. If you look online, what language do Gibraltarians speak? The result that you'll usually find is that they're bilingual in Spanish and English. However, day to day, they speak this dialect of Spanish, which is similar to the Andalusian dialect of Spanish, but with a load of random English words thrown in. And I would say, based on what I overheard, right? I don't have any Gibraltarian friends, but based on what I overheard, I would say that's pretty accurate. However, where I think it doesn't appear to be accurate, and it may represent a change, a sort of intergenerational change, is there was a couple of times when I happened to be taking the bus at about 4 o'clock, and I guess it was schools were kicking out, right?
All right, yeah.
And so on the bus, there were a load of school children in their mid-teens. I don't know exactly how old they were, but in their mid-teens. Now, I think it was fair to assume that they were all locals. I mean, in theory, I suppose they could have been all the children of expats, but it would seem unlikely. It's much more likely that they were all locals, right? At least the majority of them. And all of them were speaking with each other in English, not using any Spanish words. So I found that really interesting. And what else is really interesting is they have a very distinct accent. So they're speaking perfectly fluent, idiomatic, fast English, yet they're not speaking an accent that I think anybody would recognize as a British accent. Now, it's not wholly Spanish either. I've spent a reasonable amount of time in Spain when I was younger, and I had quite a few Spanish friends, and I wouldn't say it's Spanish. It's certainly closer to Spanish than it probably is to anything else, but it's not a Spanish accent, And one thing, and this is maybe a little bit esoteric, but so I've got to try and figure out how to quickly explain this without boring everybody. English is a stress-timed language, right? So what that means is we pace our sentences based on where the word stress is.
Yeah.
So what that allows us to do when we speak is we can basically compress sentences and drop syllables and sounds. So, for example, if I wanted to say to Thomas, "Are we going to the pub?" I wouldn't have to. And in fact, rarely would I say, "Are we going to the pub?" I'd say, "Are we going to the pub?" Right? The stress is on pub. Are we going to the pub? So that's very clear. Are we going to the pub? Right? But the other words you've heard in the middle, are we going to I don't even say the words, right? I push them all together. And so that's how we speak in English. One of the reasons why it's quite difficult for a lot of non-native speakers to understand, because we're essentially missing out words. We're missing out whole parts of a sentence, but it's entirely understandable to English speakers because of the stress. We listen to the stress. Spanish isn't a stress time language. It's a syllable time language, right? And what that means is that when you speak in Spanish, you basically need to say every single syllable. And it's one of the reasons why it often sounds like Spanish people are speaking really quickly, because you can't do in Spanish what we can do in English, where you just drop sounds and drop syllables. You need to say every syllable. And that's why when a Spanish person speaks, it sounds like they're speaking really quickly because they're saying all of the syllables, whereas we're only saying maybe half of the syllables, right? So back onto my point about these Gibraltarian young people, and I really hope you followed along with that, listeners. When these Gibraltarian kids were speaking, it sounded to me like they were saying every syllable very quickly. So what it sounded like to my ear, and A, I'm not a professional linguist, B, I haven't studied, Gibraltarian English. So I'm not saying this is absolutely true, but what it sounded like to my ear was that they basically were speaking English, but they were speaking English as if it was a syllable time language like Spanish is. And I thought that was really, really interesting.
No, I think that's interesting. Yeah.
So it was very incredibly quickly when they were spoke. I mean, I speak quickly, but far quicker than I speak, because they were saying every single syllable. And so I think that was really interesting. And so I wouldn't say that it's incorrect what it says on the internet, that most people day to day are speaking this Spanish dialect. It probably is true, but there may be a generational shift where the younger people who've grown up probably with British TV, American films, and so on are much more comfortable speaking English first and a Spanish dialect second.
So they're speaking English as influenced by knowing Spanish in the same way that in
Yeah.
parts of Wales people speak Wenglish, like
Yeah,
English,
yeah.
but with Welsh logical grammar and
Yeah,
quirks.
yeah, things like that. So, and like I said, I haven't studied it. It's just what I overheard on a bus. Maybe I completely misinterpreted, but it was certainly interesting. It is very interesting as well if you're into languages to think of this version of English, because we all know about the main versions. Broadly speaking, British, which we can then separate into the various English versions, and Scottish and Welsh, and then of course we have the North American and Australian. But rarely do we speak about these others, right? Like, for example, Maltese English. I don't think I've ever heard somebody speaking Maltese English, but there are many native speakers of English in Malta. English is an official language of Malta, so there is a Maltese English, right?
Yeah,
But I've never heard it spoken before, which is really interesting. And of course, there's a Gibraltarian English, and when I heard it for the first time, it was a very interesting, unique listening experience.
It is interesting to travel as not exactly within the UK, but to, as you said, a British overseas territory and discover another accent, because the UK is so full of them.
Another way to confuse second language speakers. I do feel for those who have to learn English as a second language, because you learn basically the way that your teacher teaches you, which will be a very understandable, relatively slow, graded way of speaking, and then you go out into the wild. You end up in Manchester or Newcastle or Louisiana or somewhere in India, or and then you hear these just crazy kind of sounds that you've probably never encountered before when you're in your English class.
Yeah, I mean, I used to have it when I was teaching at the University of Bradford, right? So we'd have the international students arrive who've been taught. You get on a bus. Hello, how are you? Where are you going? And they get on a bus. Yep, going to town.
Yeah, exactly. Excuse you, what?
One student literally just got off the bus. They're like, I'm not dealing with this.
Not today. I'll walk.
Yeah.
So I hope, listeners, that you did enjoy that. And if you are in Europe, if you're in the UK, definitely consider a trip to Gibraltar. I think that people can really, really enjoy it. I'm surprised that it is not a more popular holiday destination. Now, one thing I will say, and probably one of the reasons why it's not so popular, is it's not cheap. So, if you're thinking about going to the Mediterranean, you often think that you're going to be going to a place where you can eat a lot better and drink a lot better than you could in the UK for the same amount of money. In Gibraltar, for food, you're going to be paying sort of London prices, really. So that's probably one of the reasons why it's less popular. But if you can get over that, or if instead of thinking about it as a trip to the Mediterranean, you just think about it in the same way that you'd think of a city break, right? If you went to Amsterdam or Berlin, you would expect to spend a bit more money, right? So if you think about it in the same sort of way, I definitely think it's worthwhile. And certainly if you are listening to this and you live in South Spain, then you can just drive across, right, or walk across the border, which would be great. But if you're in the UK, direct flights from Manchester or London, and because it is walkable and so small, it's worth it even just for a weekend. Go on a Friday afternoon, come back on a Sunday evening, and I think you'll have a great time and enjoy one of the interesting outposts of British culture.
Caine, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I really, really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much for listening. That was Caine and I talking about what you can do if you go to Gibraltar. Timothy Dalton, of course, had a wonderful time there in the living daylights in the pre-title sequence. A brilliant film, although my personal favourite Timothy Dalton film is, of course, Licence to Kill, which I talked about on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/British Culture, part of my Smorgasbond video selection. And of course, Caine, you can also find on YouTube, youtube.com/videos by Caine. Or you can find him in any number of deep dive podcasts that we've done together. Deep Dive into Tea, British Men's Wardrobes, and of course he explains St. George's Day. He really is a phenomenal guest. I'm very lucky to have him again. So again, thank you to Caine for coming on again, and thank you for listening.